So there's a lot of uncertainty with markets. You never really know when prices are going to change or when there's going to be a drastic shift, when there might be some sort of weather event, when you might have more suppliers entering into the area. And this level of uncertainty makes it very difficult sometimes to clear the market, to get to the idea of a market equilibrium. So this is going to be a hodgepodge of starting a couple different topics that I think will at least be interesting. And if you ever want to know more about them, you just let me know. And it's going to be on uncertainty search. And then we're going to talk a little bit about auction theory. Okay, which auction theory is actually pretty cool. It's won like 3 of the last 7 Nobel Prizes. So, I mean, it's pretty important. Price uncertainty. So some consumers face numerous stores selling identical products, right? But they charge different prices. That's the idea of you might try to buy your phone from your provider and it's one price, or you can go to Best Buy and get another price with different rebates, or you can go to Walmart. They might have a similar phone for a different set of prices and rebates. And there's so many different things. They're all almost identical, but you get charged different prices. It's the same for lots of other different products. For example, this is like a highlighter pencil, right? I can buy versions of highlighter pencils pretty much anywhere. It's a pretty standard thing. They're all fairly identical, but some are $5 a box, some are $2 a box, some sell independently. And these are things that we kind of have to think about, right? So the consumer wants to purchase the product at the lowest possible price. I'd like to think if these are all identical products with identical qualities, that I would like to buy whichever one costs the least amount, but there's also a cost to acquire that information, right? The cost, we call it C, incurs whatever it needs for you to understand the prices or for you to get that information. Remember, we talked about limited information earlier. So that would be me going to the websites of lots of different places that sell this highlighter pen. It could be me going and shopping around at different places, checking on Amazon, doing a bunch of other things. There's a cost that's occurring with this. And then there's a reservation price of the consumer, right? The price at which the consumer is kind of indifferent in between purchasing or continuing to search. So it might be that there's a $2 pack of highlighters or a $3 pack of highlighters, and I'm not sure which stores have the $2 or $3 ones. It could be the fact that if I go to a store and I see that they have the $3 highlighters, I might think, well, you know what? If I want to go search through all the other stores, if I want to go calling people, figuring out their prices, by the time I find the $2 highlighters, it's going to cost me at least another $1 of my time and effort. I'm just going to say, whatever, and just buy the $3 set right now, right? There might be some sort of reservation price where I'm just like, when I think about the price that I could get plus the cost it takes to get it, it may not be worth it, right? So that kind of begs the question, when should a consumer kind of stop searching for price information? This is important as a manager, because when you know about your product, where else your product is available, how much more you're selling than them, and how difficult it is for consumers to find information about other products, this allows you a little bit more information about figuring out when consumers might find your product and then just stop searching elsewhere, right? So when are searches beneficial? Searches and going and looking around for the better price over and over and over and talking to people and things like that. Well, they're kind of best when there's things for commitment agreements, right? Things that you have long-term that you can't easily get out of. Lease agreements. It's probably best to get a pretty good apartment, right? If you have a roach infestation, you're stuck with it for 12 months. Employment contracts. These are things that you will likely be working for 20 to 40 years. Like, that's something very important to have a good commitment agreement on. There's the idea of marriage contracts. You typically want to pick one that's beneficial to you for a long period of time. So when engaging in the idea of search, when continuing to search and look at other options and come up with different ideas, there's an additional cost and uncertain benefits. And the ability or amount of risk a person's willing to gamble kind of depends on their feelings of risk. A person might be risk averse. They might be much more willing to pay that search cost, right? Because they want to make sure that they're getting the right deal. They might look up 12 more apartments. They might go check out 3 or 4 more jobs. They might look at all the different insurance contracts. They might go and look at every single thing because they're a fairly risk averse individual. And they might be willing to take a lower paying job or a lower agreement or cheaper rent just because, you know, it's a place that's available and they're sure that they can get it. All right, then there's the idea of people who are risk neutral. They're pretty indifferent to risk. And then there's people who are risk loving. They love risk. They're going to try to get the cheap apartment that may or may not have a roach problem in the hopes that it doesn't have a roach problem, right? They're going to take a job that pays a ton but might be miserable in the hopes that, maybe it's not that miserable, or maybe this company's going to make it. Maybe they'll go work for the startup that they believe will be big one day. So there's lots of different levels of risk that people are willing to gamble with when they're making their decisions. So let's think about the example of apartment hunting. I'm pretty sure we've all had to do it at one point or another. And I know that these prices also just aren't reasonable. The other classes, for some reason, use them. And I think it's because the last time they searched for an apartment was about 20, 30 years ago. But let's think about it. Should you search for an apartment further? There's a typo in here. I'll fix it. So let's say you're searching for an apartment in a neighborhood where there's identical apartments. All the apartments look basically the same from the outside. And they're either $400 or $360. Of the vacant apartments, almost all of them, 80% of them, they're the $400 apartments, while 20% of them are that cheaper $360 apartment. So, well, does it make sense to keep looking and looking and looking until you find that $360 apartment? Well, first you have to visit the apartment and get a rental rate. Well, you're very likely going to see a $400 apartment. That's 80% of them. So you go there, you figure out it's $400, and you say, okay, well, it's going to cost me an additional about $6 of time off work and effort to go check out a different apartment. So is it really necessarily worth it to me? And don't worry, I'm not going to make you figure out the expected value. You can if you want to go back to earlier slides and look at it. But let's just kind of talk through what it means. There's an 80% chance that the next apartment that I look at is going to be one of these $400 apartments. So I would just be out that $400 plus that $6. I'd also be out that. But there's also a chance that I might find one of these $360 apartments, but there's only a 1 in 5 chance. It's very, very low. So you need to think about the expected values. Is this cost of additional visits actually worth it or not? And this comes along with personal risk analysis. What sort of risk person are you? If you're a risk-averse person, an individual who prefers a sure amount of money to a risky prospect with an unexpected future value, you might instead say, you know what, I'm just going to take this $400 apartment. I don't want to gamble with losing that $6 to maybe end up with another $400 apartment. I'm just going to take this one. Risk loving might be indifferent in between, I could keep looking or not. And risk neutral might be, I could take it or leave it. Risk loving might be, you know what? This $400. I'm feeling good. I'm gonna pay the $6 to go look at another apartment, take some more time off of work, and I have a good feeling that this time it's going to be that $360 apartment. It's going to be cheaper. The risk-loving person might be willing to take that gamble. The risk-averse person wouldn't necessarily, right? So does the amount that people avoid risk, or they're averse to risk, impact decisions? Well, clearly all the time, right? This is why we try to have more information for people, because lots and lots of people in the world, they're very risk averse. This is why we have informative advertising that tells you about the price, the products, what the product does, how customers are happy, things that are very informative to them, because this makes people feel less risk averse. They're like, oh, okay, well, if I am very sure about what this product does and the quality of it, well, then I'm more likely to do it. This is the whole reason they give out free samples. Oftentimes people are relatively risk averse. They're not going to go out and try new foods. But if you give them a free sample, they might be willing to try the free sample and then be willing to try the new food because they have a little bit of information about it. It's also why they offer guarantees. People tend to be really risk averse. So if you offer them a guarantee for their money back, they might be more likely to purchase a product they would not have otherwise purchased. This is also why chain stores are so popular. Why do people go to Olive Garden? It's not because Olive Garden's good, right? It's because Olive Garden is always the same. You know, whichever Olive Garden you go to, it's going to have about the same quality and type of meal, and it's going to taste about the same. You might go to Walgreens because you know that every single Walgreens is fairly similar. They're going to have the same range of products. You don't have any uncertainty on what's going to be there. So risk aversion is why we have a lot of the structure that we do, why we try to give a lot of information on product quality, why we have chain stores, why people invest in insurance. If everybody was risk loving, they wouldn't, but lots of people are risk averse, where they want to have consumption smoothing. They want to take away a little bit of money from their good days to pay for those bad days. And this sort of consumption smoothing with insurance, that's a feature of risk aversion, how it impacts decisions, but also how we talk to those customers who are very risk averse. So let's take an example of job searches, right? Let's say that you wanted to go search for a job. Well, additional search time is more likely to be worthwhile for expensive jobs rather than cheap ones. If you're looking for just a $15 an hour job, it turns out that there's a lot of them out there right now, right? You can just kind of switch in between the two, and spending more and more time or more months looking for a better one doesn't necessarily matter all that much when you're looking at a difference between $15.50 and $16. But when it's expensive jobs, when you start talking about making 200,000 versus 250,000, those start being much larger. So additional search time, taking an additional 2 or 3 months to look for that really good match starts to make sense. We see this as it's similar with elasticity, right? When it's something that's a low amount of your income or very cheap, we don't really feel as much price differences. But when it's something that's a high amount of your income or very expensive, we tend to be much more elastic to price changes. Wages paid will also be higher when the cost of a search is higher. When it's very difficult to find a job in your field, that field must pay higher, right? Restaurants, they don't really have to be competitive for one another. They know that there's always a million people who want to work, and then there's, well, in most times there's a million people who want to work at those jobs and a million jobs for them to have. There's lots of people in turnover all the time. It's very fast paced. But when it's talking about something like a specialized type of radiology with one particular type of machine, well, those wages have to be a lot higher, right? Because then you have to have not only someone who's going to take them a long time and many months to find somebody looking for that specialized piece, but also to have that sort of matching, paying someone for that educational ability that they have in it and things like that. Another example that economists tend to use is Akerlof's lemons. All right, not actually lemons. We're talking about like lemons, the car. When your car just this car might be a good car or it might be a lemon. A lemon just means not good quality, but you thought it was good quality when you purchased it. This work by George Akerlof actually in 1970 was the reason why he eventually got a Nobel Prize, because of some of the basic decision making and ideas of uncertainty and behavioral economics and some of the foundational pieces of this, of how people might make rational decisions under different types of risk. So let's start off with a situation, then we're going to talk about a couple ideas, and then we're going to come back to the same situation. Let's say, will Jane sell her car to Tom? Okay, so let's say we have two people, Jane and Tom. Jane wants to sell her terrible 2009 Chevy Equinox. Might be terrible, might be not. I'm just kind of basing this off my own because I drive a very beat up Chevy Equinox from 2009 that I really need to replace, but that's tough and hard, and then I have to go shopping. Anyways, let's say that there's a reasonable amount of miles on it. There's a complete maintenance record. So since Jane's taken better care of her car than I've taken care of mine, maybe her reservation price is higher. The average Blue Book price of the 2009 Chevy Equinox might be about $8,000, but because she knows that there's a low amount of miles, she has a complete maintenance record, it's never been in an accident, her reservation price is that she's not willing to part with this for more than $10,000. Okay. Remember this, all right? The price for Blue Book is $8,000. It's really good quality though, and she wants to sell it for $10,000. Let's keep that in mind and come back to it after we talk about a couple things, because there's a lot of problems with commitment, right? The economics of commitment. What happens when a better deal comes after you finish searching? You search for a car and you find the one and you purchase it, and then all of a sudden there's a better deal the next day. Happens all the time with house hunting. You look for a house, you buy a house, you think you got a nice price, and then the house next door goes for sale, and it's like, oh, I could have had a better price. And then you just start kicking yourself over it, right? When information is costly and the search must be limited, you have a limited amount of time and it's costly to figure out all the details about a house or all the details about a car, then the relationship may dissolve. You may not end up buying and selling things because there's so much information that needs to be shared that sometimes is difficult or expensive to get. We call this idea asymmetric information. It's the idea that one person may have more information than the other person. The person selling their house definitely knows more about their house than the person who's buying it, right? The person selling their car, they know if that car got into an accident or not. They know if they put some sketchy parts into their car way more than the person buying it. There might be some sort of mismatch in between buyers and sellers where there's not an equal amount of information about the characteristics of a good that's for sale, right? So when we go back to the idea of Jane wants to sell her car, there's reasonable miles, her reservation wage is $10,000. Like she wants to make at least $10,000 on this car because she knows it's in good quality. Well, what about Tom? Does Tom know that it's in good quality? Well, if this car is in excellent condition, if it has a great maintenance record, everything else, he might be willing to pay up to $13,000. But if it's kind of in shoddy repair, it's not as good, he might only be willing to pay $9,000. Well, the thing is, he doesn't know if Jane has an excellent car or not. Even though he sees the maintenance records and he might see he has a low number of miles, he may not know, did it get into an accident? Did the miles get reprogrammed? Are these original parts? Has the insurance lapped at any point? Like, does anybody ever spill drinks in this car? He doesn't know those things, right? So Jane may not be willing to sell this for less than 10,000. Tom may not be willing to buy this car because he can't for sure say that this is an excellent condition car he'd be worth spending 13,000 on. It's kind of, if he's a risk averse person, he's always going to assume like, maybe this is not the best quality car. So he would be only willing to pay 9. She'd be willing to sell it for 10, even if it's an excellent car in excellent condition, because it's very costly to do maintenance and ask people to look at it. This trade may not happen. Well, if this trade doesn't happen, it on paper would have been great for them to do, but Tom's hesitant because he doesn't know all the information about the car. That means a deadweight loss might occur from trades not happening. This is just a loss in consumer surplus because there's not going to be a difference between what he would have been willing to pay and what he actually paid if the trade does not happen, right? And this is the idea of the Plemmons market. It's the idea that there might be asymmetric information. George Akerlof uses the idea of cars because at the time, especially in the 1970s, that's where you had like the sketchy used car dealers that you see all the time in older movies that like wore gold chains or something and just seem kind of like sketchy. Well, this was a time period where there was not as many checks or as much transparency on cars. It was before Carfax for sure. And because it was difficult for people to get all the information about a car, like you kind of needed a mechanic that you could trust to go with you to look at it and things like that. This asymmetric information that the people selling the cars had more information than the ones purchasing it tended to reduce the average quality of the cars that ended up being offered for sale. Because they're like, you know what? No one's going to know. No one's going to know that this car has not been in as good a condition. No one's going to know that I put the 2 best wheels on the front and then we're just kind of going to hide those ones in the back that aren't that good. They're not going to know that this transmission's been skipping every now and then, right? So they didn't really have an incentive to keep putting really good cars on the lot because the people buying who didn't have information about it weren't really willing to pay the top price anyways because they didn't know if it was a good car. And the average quality of cars went down. People who had below average cars, so things like Plemmons, they really want to sell them. And buyers know that these lower cars are these cars that might be Plemmons are below their reservation prices. They're not worth it. So because used car prices are low, people with good cars tend to keep them for longer. The average quality of cars keeps going down until eventually you got to a point where the used car market in the 1970s was trash. That's why you ended up getting Carfax eventually to try to rectify some of this asymmetric information issue, because there was so much of a difference in between what the people selling the car knew and what the people buying the car knew, that trades just weren't happening, which took away from consumer surplus, right? So there's 2 types of asymmetric information that we're thinking about. First is hidden characteristics. Maybe things one party in a transaction knows about itself, but which are unknown to the other party. That's the idea that the mechanic may know that the engine's not in the best of shape, or the spark plugs haven't been changed in a while, or the oil has been overdue for a long time. That might be something that they know, but it's hidden from the other party. The other idea is the idea of hidden actions. Actions taken by one party in a relationship that cannot be observed by the other party. That's the idea that maybe the buyer lies about what they're willing to pay. Maybe the person selling the car might have put out an advertisement for a really great deal on a car, but they didn't really have that car in stock. So everybody came in looking for that car and they're like, oh, sorry about that. But we got these other things sitting around just as good, I promise. Right? There might be some sort of hidden characteristics of the car itself or hidden actions of the people working with the car. So there's 2 different types of concerns for this asymmetric information. One is the idea of adverse selection. People may not end up with things that they necessarily want or might be best for them. And the idea of moral hazard. People may not be working in the best interest of each other. The mechanic may not be working in the best interest of the person trying to purchase a car, and the person purchasing the car might want to lowball them and not necessarily be working in the best interest of the person they're buying it from, right? So that's kind of the asymmetric information part. I told you we're just kind of giving an overview of a lot of very big concepts that at least you should know, because you know you're not going to remember absolutely everything from this class. I'm sorry to tell you that, but I at least want to give you enough that if you wanted to look something up or if you had an idea that you knew a starting place to go deeper. So let's talk about auctions, because auction theory, very popular. It didn't get the Nobel Prize this year or the year before. It got the Nobel Prize 2 years ago, and a couple times before then too. But auctions are used for a whole bunch of things. This is a way of when there's asymmetric information, it's very difficult for knowing how much people value a good or service. Well, if you don't really know how much they value it, we need some sort of mechanism of eliciting that idea. Would someone be willing to pay $3,000 for this vase or $30,000 for this vase? So they're used for lots of things that are difficult to really understand the true value of, right? Art, contract rights, consumer goods, treasury bills, because treasury bills, what people are willing to pay for them is really tied to the feelings within the market, right? So there's a couple different major types of auctions. I'm going to go through each of them just so you have the idea. We have the English auction. This is the one that you're probably very familiar with. First price sealed bid. This is the one and second price sealed bid. These two you're very used to if you do government contracts. I know a lot of people taking this class are healthcare related. So this is something that it might be useful for y'all to know about, because it's something that when purchasing like medical equipment becomes important. And there's Dutch auctions. So let's at least go through the basics of what each of these are. English auctions, that's the one that you're probably very used to. There's a person, they'll have a gavel, they'll bang their gavel and say, all right, we're going to start the bidding. Who has $100? $100 to $100, $105, $105. And they start talking through all that, right? It's an ascending sequential bid where people can raise their hand and then, okay, well, they're willing to bid that amount. So they raise the price, see if someone's willing to pay the next price. They raise the price again, see if someone's willing to pay the next price, until eventually the price has gone up and no one else is willing to raise the price anymore. Whoever was the last one to bid, they get it at that price. Bidders are able to observe the bids that other people put in, and the items just sold to whoever's willing to pay the most for it, right? Well, with independent private valuation, the optimal strategy is to remain active until the price exceeds your own valuation. It makes sense for you to keep bidding until it is no longer financially worthwhile to you. The next idea is a first price sealed bid. So first price sealed bids, these ones are kind of cool. These are the ones that happen in contracts a lot. That's the idea of say there's a construction contract that needs to happen. There needs to be a new ship built. Well, how do governments find out who to sell that to? Well, a lot of time they have people submit a bid. Now, the bids aren't public. They're not telling everybody how much they're bidding. They're just saying, how much would I be willing to do that work for? Maybe someone says $3 million and slides it over, and okay, they bid $3 million. So if they win, the contract would pay $3 million, or they would be willing to take $3 million for this work. This can happen for things like that. It can also happen for sometimes in like online auctions. So not the eBay type, but the type where they might be offering up vacation packages. You see this a lot with local charities and things, where they might say, we have, I don't know, I have a tablet right here. Let's say we have a tablet. How much would you be willing to pay for it? And everybody will like write down a number and put it in a little envelope and submit it. And whoever has the highest number ends up getting the item. So the item goes to the highest bidder. Bidders don't know what the other bidder said because it's a sealed bid, right? Well, the optimal strategy at that is to bet the amount that you think will win, not necessarily your maximum valuation. You think, oh, okay. This tablet, I'm probably the only person who cares about the tablet. I might really value this tablet at $600, but I don't think anybody else is going to pay more than $100 for it. So what I'm instead going to do, instead of the $600 that I'd value it as, I might say, I'm willing to write a bid for $110. I think that's going to beat everybody else. Well, notice that there's a little bit of a problem there. In our English auction, you vote to, or you agree to a price worth what you like, right? Or what you think will win, or what you actually value it. First price sealed bid, it's just what you think is going to beat everybody else, not actually your true valuation. So if you think everybody else is going to bid 100, but you really valued the tablet at 600, and then someone who really valued it at 200 bets 200, well, now you lose it, even though you would have had the most consumer surplus for that good. That's when second price sealed bids come in. So second price sealed bids is the same sort of thing. Everybody writes down a number. So let's say that we have this beautiful tablet, and I might value it at 600. Okay, well, this is the idea that we all write down a number of what we bid for it, slide it in, and when they're opened up, the person who wins, the item goes to the highest bidder, but at the second bidder's price, right? So let's say that I value it at 600, I think everybody's going to value it at 100, but there's secretly a person who values it at 200. Okay, well, then I'm going to put 600 down on my piece of paper, slide it in, and then when they're all opened up, I win, but I pay the $200 that the second highest bidder would have had. Well, this does incentivize me to put my true amount, right? How I truly value the product. I'm not trying to say, people value it 100, I'm going to put it at 110. Instead of be willing to say, I value it at 600 to beat whatever's underneath there, but pay the lower price. So this is another way to incentivize people to reveal their true preferences for a product. Finally, we have the idea of Dutch auctions. Dutch auctions are cool. And if you ever get a chance to go to one, you really should. Dutch auctions are very, very popular. You might have heard of tulip mania, which may or may not have happened historically, but all the economists love it so much that we treat it like it happened. It was back in the 1600s where tulip bulbs became so valuable that everybody just went crazy. They wanted the newest and coolest flowers. And it got to the point where people kept like bidding so high of prices that like people were selling their homes to buy flowers, and just everything went into absolute chaos. How much that story has been overblown in the past 400 or 500 years, we have no idea, but we know at least there were some actual wild and crazy auctions related to tulips in the tulip mania of Dutch auctions. Anyways, how Dutch auctions work is they are a descending price. So you have a clock, and as the clock ticks down, the price goes down. So like every few seconds, let's say that the price of this tablet was $1,000. 5 seconds later, it's $900. 5 seconds later, $800. 5 seconds later, $700. 5 seconds later, $600. Whoa, me, right? Because it gets to the price that I'm willing to pay for it. But that's not always necessarily the one that wins, right? Well, that is the one that wins, but it's not necessarily what I would bid. I might say, I think everybody else in this room won't pay more than 100. I'm going to wait till the price gets down to about 150, and then I'm going to bid. Even though I value it at 600, I think everybody else is going to value it that much. So I'm going to wait for the clock to even dip or down. Strategically, this is equivalent to the first price auction, right? It's where you might try to game the system by trying to have a price that's lower than what your actual valuation is. But I think it's interesting. It's just a decreasing price auction, where instead of like in English auctions where they call out numbers going up, it's calling out numbers going down. All right, then finally, let's talk about the winner's curse. In common value auctions, the winner is the bidder who's the most optimistic, right? That they believe that this is really worth something. But that doesn't always mean that the value of the item is as much as what they think it is. To avoid the winner's curse, a bidder should revise downwards their private estimate, right? It's the idea that almost everybody loves the idea of winning, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the silent auctions where you go and you see like a gift bag that you want. So you write down a price, you write down your name and price. And then someone else comes by and they write down their name and price, and you go by and you're like, oh, it's $30 more expensive. But you get a little bit of happiness from winning. So even though it's more than you would value this product at, you want to win. So you go and bid them up, and the next person bids them up and bids them up and bids them up, and so on and so forth, until eventually the winner, yeah, they have it, but they paid more than they probably cared about. Well, to avoid this sort of winner's curse situation, it's the idea that you just need to be cautious and revise your valuation downwards to also think about the idea, like, do I really want it for this amount, or am I just trying to win? Mostly happens in sealed bag options. That's it. So if you haven't watched it, you should go back and watch the introduction video where I do talk a little bit about the project, because remember that the outline of the project is due this week. Besides that, I hope you have a great week. Next week, we don't have any formal material. It's going to be taking a long exam. The exam itself, which I also talk about in the introduction video, it's going to be fun. Or well, should be fun. I at least think it's an interesting thought experiment, and I hope you all enjoy it too. Okay, well, I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.